Hey guys, welcome back to Heart Breathings. We are on video number 4 of my How to Edit Your Novel series. And today we're going to be talking about something that I know plagues so many writers is how do you know when your book is done? How do you know when it's finished and you're done fiddling with it and it's ready to go? Well, I'm going to give you a few tips here today, so stay tuned. So this is one of those things that is tough for every writer, especially when it's your first novel. How do you know when it's good enough? And how do you know when you're done fiddling with it and it's ready to go off to an agent, or it's ready to send off to your editor, or you're ready to self-publish it? And self-publishing makes it even more like, because you no longer have that like agent or, publisher who's telling you, okay, now it's ready, and you've got all that feedback where they're guiding you through the process. When it comes to self-publishing, there's no one who decides that it's ready and it's your time to publish except for you, because you're the author and you're ultimately your publisher as well. So that's made it a little bit harder, because it used to be, you would send it out when you felt like it was ready and an agent would, represent it or not. And then it would go to a publishing house who would decide that it was ready or not. And then they would help you edit it, and then they would put a deadline on it and it would be done. And I'm not saying that makes the editing process easy, but it just makes it even more challenging when you're publishing your own novel. So, how do you know when it is ready to send off to that agent or when you are ready to self-publish it? So here's where it gets tricky. Guys, as you know, there is no magical editing fairy that's going to just come down from wherever and sit on your shoulder and say, oh, your book is finished. This is it. There's no like chorus of angels that's going to sing. There's no, moment where you're going to type the words and suddenly the computer will pop up with a message that says, that's it. You're done. The book is done. Unfortunately, it would be great if that was something that happened, but sadly that is not ever going to happen. It's totally up to you, and that is where things get really terrifying. Like, what if it's not good enough? What if the readers don't love it? What if, I put something out that's crap or that's nowhere near what I feel like I could do? And those are all natural fears that come about, and they're fears you're just going to have to face as an author, because like I said, especially if you're self-publishing, there's never anyone who's going to give you permission and say, okay, this is it, you're ready to go. Unless maybe you hire an editor that you ask them to like, tell me when it's ready. And then you have to pay them a lot of money to keep going through your book over and over again. And most of us just don't have that kind of luxury. So how do you know? And the first little tip that I'm going to give you, after more than 25 books published and finished at this point, I will give a little note there that there are several books, at least 3 books in my like closet under the bed, so to speak, that have not been published because I was writing for years before I published my first novel. But even going back to that first novel back in 2010, I can look at it now and I can see all the juvenile writing, all the mistakes, all the like places where I told instead of showing, or places where I used lazy language or, whatever. And that book is very short. It's 50,000 words or a little bit less than 50,000 words. But I could go back now and I could re-edit that book 100 times. And then 5 years from now, I could re-edit it again, because you're constantly learning. So in that way, my first tip for you guys is that it's never going to be totally finished. Like, no work of art is ever completely finished. And that is one of the great challenges is, you could let something sit and then 2 months later you can come back to it and there's always something like, maybe I could fiddle with this word. Maybe I could change this little thing. Maybe this comma would be better here. Maybe I should go into this character's like thoughts a little bit more here. There's always going to be things like, I bet I could go back to Beautiful Demons, which was my first published book in 2010. And I bet I could add 20 or 30,000 words to it, knowing what I know now. I could make it a lot better, but it wouldn't be worth it for me to do that, because that book was part of my journey. It was where I was at the time. And if you were to pick up Beautiful Demons and then also go pick up the most recent book in that series, which is book 10, and read all the way through, you would see the journey of my writing as you go through it, because book 10 is masterpiece compared to book 1. But I'm sure 10 years from now, when I look back on book 10, Deceiving Darkness, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, look at all these mistakes I made. And so just the mindset of understanding that you're never going to have a book that is pure perfection and it was exactly what you wanted it to be and it came out exactly like it needed to be and it was the best novel ever written, and you'll never come back to it and think of, things that you could change about it. So that is good news because it means you don't have to be perfect. Nothing has to be like the best book ever written. You don't have to put that kind of pressure on yourself. But it's bad news because how do you know when you're done fiddling with it and it's good enough to be published? And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about. But I wanted to address that first, that, it's never going to be where it's just done and there's nothing you could change about it to make it better or different in any way, because there's always, it's art. There's always something you could change. So you have to let go of the idea that you're going to someday just be so done with this that it's perfect and there's not a single word on the page that could change, or, you would ruin it. Like, there's just never going to be that point. So go ahead and get that in your mind first and you'll be better off. So back to the question at hand. When is it done? When do you know it's done? And again, the first little tip that I'm going to give you here is maybe one that's going to frustrate you a little bit, but it's the most truth that I have learned over the course of almost 9 years of writing professionally, which is it's done when it feels right. And if you've never finished a novel before, that is going to seem like very ethereal advice. Like, what? When does it feel right versus feel wrong? But I will tell you this. Every novel, including that first novel that I published back in 2010, has had a moment in the editing where the way I like to describe it is, when you have those like lock combinations, right? Where you're spinning the dial and you have to turn it one way and then turn it the other way. And when you turn it that last little bit, that little tumbler or whatever, and you feel it click into place and you can pull it down, I'm thinking of those like lockers that you had in school, the locks like that. There's always a moment for me with every book where I just feel that last little tumbler or that last little key fall into place. And I know that my story has been unlocked and this is the way it is. And this is the way it was meant to be. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a word on the page that I could change or something I could fix, or a typo still sitting in there somewhere, or like maybe this conversation could be tweaked, because like I said, there's always room for improvement, but there's always this part of me instinctually that goes, that's it. This is the story that I was going to tell, and I can feel it. So when you hit that point in your story where that little bit of magical, like, key or whatever falls into place and the story is unlocked, and this is the major building blocks of the story, that it has come together and it feels the way that you want it to feel, that is the first step toward knowing that your book is done. So it's about trusting your instincts. And I understand 100% that hearing me say that might be terrifying for some of you that haven't finished your first novel, because you're thinking, I don't know what feels right. But this is where you have to trust yourself and you have to trust the process. Maybe you haven't felt that experience yet because you haven't pushed yourself to that point. Maybe you've hit the middle, or you've finished a rough draft and you're still messing and fiddling with the edits, but you're too scared to really just let yourself immerse in it or to let yourself be done with it. Take a step and go, how does this feel? How does this feel in terms of the story that I knew I wanted to create? Like, I was going to tell a story about a girl who is abandoned, had no parents, was in foster home to foster home, and comes into this haunted sort of spooky house and discovers there are secrets in this town that tie to her past. I wanted that story and I wanted it to feel a certain way. And I knew that as I was writing. And so when that story unlocked for me, and I felt it fall into place, I knew that I had told the story I meant to tell. And yes, words could be changed here and there. But after you've been through the process, like if you go back and watch that first video in this series, How to Self-Edit Your Novel, once you've been through that series of steps and it's been through, the rounds of edits, you've read it out loud, you've changed all these things, it's really about how does it feel? And once it feels like it's come into place and you've done the best work you can do to make sure the words are the right words and you've expressed yourself, then the book is done. And that's when you send it off and you start to get feedback. And it's going to go through a few different rounds of, feedback with other people, be it critique partners, beta readers, editors, whatever, agents, maybe if you're traditionally publishing. And it will get better, but those things are just refining the process. And then you're going to say, okay, now it's done. But it's really about feeling your way through it and trusting that when it seems to click for you, it's like this innate knowing that this is the story I was meant to tell and it's done, then you can move forward. And like I said, if you haven't ever hit that point yet, it's because you haven't, pushed yourself through to the end of this process. And I will tell you, as much as I don't want to say this, that sometimes there might be stories for you, if this is your first, second, or third novel that you've tried to write, that you may never get to that point, that somehow you have taken so many tours and detours and changes and everything that your story that you originally meant to tell is unrecognizable and you can't see how to bring it together. And sometimes that might mean that you need to set that story aside. If you've been working on it for years and it just feels like this big mess and it never feels like it's come together the way you wanted it to, maybe it's time to move on to a different story. But that's a video for another time, because I also know so many authors who have, hit that point and then just moved on to another story. And then a year later, another story, and then another story. And they never bring themselves to that point. But you have to understand that you are learning every step of the way. So first way that you know when it's done is when it feels right. When you feel like the story you were meant to tell, that you were intending to tell, is there on the page. And at this point, it's just about word choice here and there, but the story is there. That's when you know you're on the path to done. So the second piece of this is, you're done at that point. The story has come together and it's unlocked itself. And now you're just endlessly fiddling with this word choice or that word choice. Should I do this or should I do that? And it becomes these very tiny, minuscule decisions. Like when you're no longer messing with the whole big picture, like the story isn't, being messed with, the characters are all in place, everything's on the page, and all you've been doing for the last, however many weeks or months or years, some of you, is changing a word here and there, like, oh, maybe I've used too many adjectives, let me go change this. Oh, maybe this character's voice is, I need to simplify her dialogue, or should I use the word lovingly, or, should I change that to not an ly word, or, whatever. Like when you're getting to that point where it's between this word or this word, like he caressed her cheek or he cupped her cheek, it doesn't really matter at this point. Yes, word choice matters, but you could spend a lifetime going through every single word of your novel and not really making it better, just changing words here and there. And it's not going to affect the essence of the story. It's not going to truly make it better. And in fact, you might start adding so many like adjectives and melodrama and all this stuff that you're making it worse. So pay attention to when you hit a point in your manuscript that all you're doing is just fiddling with words here and there over and over and over and reading back through and changing tiny little tweaks. Your story is done. It's time to send it off to an editor, let them tell you what needs to be fixed, and then you need to let that story go. And then anything that you feel you need to improve can be improved in the next novel. But when all you're doing is fiddling with those little tiny details over and over again, it's time to let the story go. If you've been through these steps that I gave you in the first video, and you've been through the reading aloud and the self-edit and, several rounds, it's done. On that same line, on that same wavelength, when you can't think of any way to really make your story better, when you're reading back through it again and nothing like stands out to you of like, gosh, I could really make this stronger, or, this really needs a little bit more explanation, or his motivation isn't quite there, or this plot twist doesn't come together right. When you're done with those big story arc things and now you really just can't think of anything to make it better, your story is done. It may not be the great American novel. It may not be the best novel ever written, but you have put together the best that you're capable of with this story right now, and you know it's done because there's nothing coming to you for how to make it better, and all the pieces are there. So that's, in my opinion, when it's time to let it go, let other people read it, and then move on. So since I just mentioned letting other people read it, when no one comes back to you, your critique partners, your beta readers, your editors, when nobody comes back to you with any like major fixes or, wow, this really needs a lot of work and it's full of red marks, like when it's just basically a few little word choice things here and there, your book is done. Like I said, when I was working with a critique group back in the day, I found this critique group mainly through NaNoWriMo and like write-ins, which I highly recommend participating in if you get a chance. But I found this group through there, and we were meeting once a week, and I would read some of their stuff. They would read chapters of mine. And in the beginning of my story and in my writing, there would be big things for them to mention, like, oh gosh, this part doesn't really make sense that they're going all this way, or they're doing this, or XYZ. And so I'd have big things to change. But as my writing grew and as I got more polished chapters for them to read again, the changes that they would have or suggest would be, like I was saying, like simple word choices. He caressed her face instead of he cupped her face, or he touched her face. Just like one words here and there would be all they would have to critique. And at that point, it's just a matter of voice, right? It's just a matter of like the feel of the book, but you're not really making it better if you change it from cupped to caressed, or from touched to I don't know what else. But like, once you're just changing those tiny little words, you're not really making the novel better. You're just making it slightly different. So at that point, you can kind of step back, read it through one more time and go, okay, this is as good as it gets, and I am done with this. So when nobody that you're getting feedback from on a regular basis has anything like really big story-wise to tell you, or, it's not just full of all these typos and grammar mistakes and the dialogue tags are wrong. Like when there's tons of comments, you've got work to do. But when there's just little word choice fiddling, you're done. You're done, baby. So the last little piece of advice that I have for you, which this one might sound a little bit silly to some people, but it's just part of the process, especially when you're indie publishing. But, when the deadline comes, when you have set yourself a deadline, like this is going to be done by June 30th, and I'm going to be completely done fiddling with it. When you hit that deadline, if, like I said, all you're doing is just fiddling with a word choice here and there, or like one scene that didn't come together perfectly, but it's basically the way you wanted it to be, it's just, maybe it's not as perfect as you want, or you're scared because it's a risky scene or whatever. If you hit that deadline and all you're doing is fiddling with word choice and there's no more like big story arc to change, the book is done and it's time to move on to the next step in the process. Now, this is one that I will kind of put with a warning, because you don't want to just start publishing a bunch of books that are very mediocre, that are like not at all what you're capable of, just because, okay, I hit a deadline and I'm trying to rush and publish quickly. I will just very briefly speak to the fact that right now, especially in indie publishing, and especially with Kindle Unlimited, if you're familiar with what that is, there is a rush right now. Everybody feels like they are rushed to publish, and they're trying to put out, 10 books a year or however many books a year. And so there are a lot of people, like I said, I don't try to add judgment anywhere, because there are a lot of people that can write that many books and they can stay quality and they can stay on track with it. But there's also a lot of people out there who are putting out what they know is not their best writing, just to try to make money quickly. And I would really warn you against that kind of publishing, because eventually that's going to come back to bite you. You may make money this year because you put out books really fast, but you're not necessarily building a fan base, because readers know what's good and what's not good. So if you're putting out stuff that's constantly like subpar or full of typos, or like just the plot doesn't come together fully, you're not really going to be gathering lifelong fans, which is what we hopefully would want to do if you're trying to build a true career as an author. So it's constantly this balance between, how fast can I write and publish versus, how can I put out the most quality book I can? And like I said, that's like an entire can of worms that I just opened there, and I don't have time to go into that. But I do want to say that, you don't want to set unrealistic deadlines for yourself where you're like expecting to finish a book in 3 weeks. And then if it's not good enough, well, who cares? I'm just going to put it out anyway to make money. if that's what you want to do, then you do you and you live your career and your life the way you want. But in my opinion, if you want to build a true lasting career where you're building up fans that will love you forever, that will be loyal forever, and books that you'll be proud to look back on 5 years from now, then you need to give yourself realistic deadlines and say, okay, I'm going to give myself X amount of months to finish this. But you do need to give yourself some kind of deadline. Otherwise, you could be working on the same book for 10 years and never finishing it. Or, like I said, you could be constantly cycling through books. Like, oh, I'm going to try this one, and you work on it for a year. It doesn't feel like it's coming together, so you move on to the next book and move on to the next book. Let me know in the comments if you've been caught in that trap before, because I think we all have kind of hit that point where, like, this book isn't coming together. I'm going to write something different, right? And sometimes it's necessary, but most of the time it's just your fear talking. If you can set a deadline, a realistic deadline for yourself, even if it's like, okay, after the rough draft is finished and now you're starting your edits, you could give yourself a rough estimate of a deadline for each round of those edits. Like, okay, I'm going to be done with this like overarching self-edit, this first pass, by 2 weeks. I'm going to give myself 2 weeks to do that. And then I'm going to give myself a week to do the line edits. And then I'm going to give myself XXX. And you continue to give yourself these kind of mini deadlines. Then what you can do is you can say, I'm going to give myself until June 30th or whatever the date is to be completely done with this book. If you hit that deadline, and like I said, it feels like the story is in place. All you're doing is messing with tiny little word choices here and there. Nobody has any feedback to give that is, devastating or completely story exploding or, completely needs to change your story. Then you can safely say, I have finished this book. And when you pass it off to that final proofreader or that final editor, it feels good to you. It may be scary, but it feels like, okay, I've done the best I can. Because the danger, of course, is that we hold on to books and we try to make them so good and we try to make them the very best that we try to compare our writing to the best authors we've ever read, and we try to make it as good as they are. But that person might have written and published 100 novels, and you're on your very first. So you can't really, it's not fair to yourself to compare yourself to that other writer. You have to start where you are, understand where you are, and do the best you can. But eventually you do need to be done with your novel, and you have to move on. And like I said, when I finished Beautiful Demons back in 2010, I wrote that book with the intention of self-publishing it. And I felt like that little lock clicked into place. The story was what I wanted it to be. And I knew deep down that it was the best I could do at the time. I can look back at it now and see all the changes that I could make, but that's always going to be the case. There's always tiny word choices. You're always going to be growing as a writer. You're always going to be learning more as you go and through experience. So you can't just hold on to things forever, tweaking little words here and there. Is the story what it was meant to be? Does it feel good to you? Have you hit your deadline? Have you been through those other processes in terms of you've self-edited the storyline, you've gone back through craft and the story, you've self-edited, line edited your book on your own, you've read it aloud, you've gone through, put it through grammar check or through spell check, you've sent it off to a line editor or critique group or something like that. Once you've followed all those steps, it's time to let that story fly, to let it go and to move on, because that's how we grow into the novelists that we're meant to be. We do the best we can with this story, and then we let it go, we let it free, we put it out there, and then we move on to the next one. So if you take nothing else from this video, just take this, that there really will never be a point in time where anyone gives you permission to publish or says, this is as good as it's going to be. You have to learn how to trust yourself, that you will know when it's good enough. And you have to be able to step away from your own fear enough to be able to say, this may not be the best I will be able to do in my entire lifetime, but I feel proud of this. I feel like this is the best I could do. I feel like this is the story I set out to tell, and it's good enough, and I'm going to let it go. And I think that comes with experience, but it also comes with just trusting yourself as an artist. And that is something that you're gonna have to learn to do if you wanna do this professionally. So hopefully you have gotten something out of this. I hate that I can't give you an exact set of steps because there just really isn't. And so even though this might be a question that has plagued you for a long time, I hope that you understand that you do have inside of you the knowledge of whether your story is right or not. So you have to learn to trust that, and then you have to move forward. I am wishing you the best, and I hope that you have enjoyed this series so far on editing. We just have one more video to go, which will launch this Sunday, and that is how I organize my edits. So I'm going to show you a inside view of exactly how I organize my editing process, which is going to go some into my favorite planner type stuff, like how I actually physically organize it, some into my Google Docs so you can see how I do it with my beta readers and everything else. So I'm going to give you some examples of how those edits look and what my process is when I know the book is finished. So if you'd like to see that, make sure that you are subscribed to this channel, hit that like button, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos come out from Heart Breathings. Also, I have an exciting announcement. So some of you have mentioned before that you really wanted a sprinting group. And I have mentioned that I run a sprinting group online, but that's kind of like a little private group. And I hate to like bring a bunch of people into it. Plus, I would love to have our own little Heart Breathing sprinting group. So here's my announcement is starting on Monday, June 10th, I am going to be running a 5-day sprinting challenge. And with that will include not only a free download to help you track your writing sprints, but it's going to include some like live videos for me sprinting. I'm going to help you find your ideal sprinting time, which means we're going to experiment throughout the week with times of day and how many words you can write in a certain period of time. So I would love for you, even if you're not actively drafting a novel, to join this challenge, but it's also going to come with free support from me in a Heart Breathings Word Sprint Facebook group that you'll have access to from now on, where we will do weekly word sprints and hang out together online. I am so excited about this group. I would love, love, love to have you join this 5-day challenge. So you'll get a free download, you'll get access to the Facebook group, and you'll get access to some Facebook Lives from me where we'll sprint together and some Q&As as well. So I would love to have you join this 5-day sprinting challenge. You can find all the information on that down below in the description box. So make sure you grab onto that and sign up now so that you'll get your download and you'll get in before we start the challenge on Monday. I cannot wait. Also, guys, we've got this Sunday, the registration for my HB90 bootcamp is opening up, and that will start on June 20th with a live kickoff call. So you can find all the information down below, but I would love to have you join this HB90 bootcamp. This is a powerful 3-day bootcamp where you get to basically go through my entire HB90 system and set up a Kanban board like the one I have back here. But it's basically about identifying your goals and your ideal vision for your life and then helping you move toward that ideal vision. I have had more than 200 students go through this course since I opened it last fall, and I am seeing lives be changed, and it is so exciting. It's definitely changed my life. So I'll be talking more about this next week. But if you would like in on that and an opportunity to join my Publish and Thrive self-publishing course with a big discount if you sign up for both, stay tuned for more information on that this weekend as well, or you can sign up down below and I'll send you an email. All right, that's all the little businessy things that I have for today, but I'm so excited about the Word Sprint Challenge and I hope you'll join us there. And otherwise, I will see you in that last editing video this weekend. Bye.